on through so we can get to the meat of the meeting today.
Okie dokie. So I am getting ready to share my screen. It's going to look a little differently than we've done before. So I'm actually sharing my whole computer screen because we'll have the PowerPoint on your left. We'll have today's document on our right so that in real time we can actually, you can see me type. And today's goal is to provide the commissioner with a good comprehensive first draft. So that will be what I will be emailing to her and team right after our meeting today. So I'm going to pull it up so we can work on it together, just workshop it together. I think it works out easier that way, or it has in the other subcommittee meetings this week. So Janet, I can only see you, so give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen.
I can.
Okay, perfect. All right, this is the document we were talking about. We'll hop into it in just a moment. But quickly, the statement, the Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. Whew, that's a big one.
We get faster every meeting, so that's good.
Every meeting. So the agenda is pretty simple today. We've just read over our statement. We really are going to hammer into development of a list. And we'll get started just by providing you a quick little timeline of January. The intent is to situate you in the charge for today's meeting, as well as think about the trajectory for the rest of the month. We have 3 meetings left and we're hitting the nitty gritty. And so I just want to provide you with a little bit of context to support you as you think forward for the rest of the month. So today, meeting number 4, I'm going to highlight as I go. Our job is to prioritize the resources that we have brainstormed over the last 3 meetings and place them into the categories of base, weights, direct funding, and outcomes. So as Janet said, as we launched into the meeting, there definitely isn't going to be an awful lot of time for pontificating or really deep debate. Today really is thinking about how would we like to represent this subcommittee's recommendations on a first draft, a first formal draft, to head over to the commissioner. So we really need to bang that list out today. So we'll roll through it in here in just a moment as we go through the rest of the PowerPoint. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about, but I think it's a really great place for us to hunker down today. Note that you did get resources right before Christmas break. I emailed the subcommittee a link to a folder in our Google Drive called January meeting or January resources. Might have been January resources. Anyway, those were resources for all that were to address all the questions and concerns that surfaced in meetings 1 through 3, an awful lot of what other states are doing. And so don't forget that folder is there. If you have already reviewed it, kudos. If you have not, you still may want to dig in. But that is meeting number 4. It's going to be a quick one today. And I apologize if I'm talking fast, but for the sake of time, let's get through it. Between meeting 4 and 5, which means at the end of this week and next week. Remember, our schedules are on week, off week, on week, off week. Well, during our off week between 4 and 5, the department will be releasing a framework of sorts, or sort of like a draft formula. And that's based on all the feedback from all 18 subcommittees, along with town halls. This draft will be open for public comment for 1 week. And as you'll see in meeting number 5, our job is to review that public comment. But before I move on to meeting 5, did want to let you know, to be very clear, this draft will not include dollars. Of course, that is decided by the governor and General Assembly. It will likely be announced at State of the State address. But we of course will be waiting to hear that. There's also, for those of you who are superintendents on the subcommittee, you know that there is a survey that you all are completing that will shape that dollar amount. And so although there might be a desire to get into some of the financial end of the conversation today, remember today is kind of those big bucket areas, and that there are other highways and byways to layer on that that funding or that dollar amount conversation. So between meeting 4 and 5, that's the draft, which means meeting number 5, our job is to review the public comment on this draft and then to make any final recommendations. And so we will have that draft in hand, and as a team, really dig through it and say yes, no, in between, tweak it here. And of course, we'll have a slide deck that leads us through with some guiding questions, but that will be the job of meeting number 5. And then the following week, we'll have meeting number 6. And meeting number 6 is really for us to consider any policy shifts we need to make, particularly when we're thinking about how we define our student groups, when we're thinking about economically disadvantaged, English learners, rural, particularly for this group. How are we defining it? Are we using the national definition, or do we need a Tennessee specific definition? So policy considerations, meeting number 6. Again, there might be a tendency today to go down that pothole and really start thinking about some nitty gritties. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but do know that today is not the last day to think about it. That in meeting number 6, there is going to be time set aside for us to get more into the weeds. Meeting number 6, we're also going to be considering what resources, tools and resources do our stakeholders need to actually operationalize a new funding formula. Of course, we know there's a longer runway, so to speak. It's not the change overnight. However, what do our school boards need? What do our local communities need that really support the shift in implementing a new funding formula? So that's meeting 4, 5, and 6. Get a list, then the draft will go out. Review the draft, make final recommendations. Then meeting 6 will wrap up with any type of considerations around policy and operational definitions. So that was yet another mouthful. I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions.
Any questions? I think the important thing we need to remember is that we don't have to focus on dollars, but what we come up with today as a group, we're not going to be adding to it today. We'll be fine. We'll be tweaking. We'll be talking about definitions in later meetings. We'll be reviewing the next round of public comments. So I want to make sure that at the end of this meeting today, and before I sign off on it in the email to the commissioner, that we've included everything we feel like it is very important to be included. And Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, because she and I discussed earlier today, it is my understanding that whatever we send in today is it. There'll be tweaking, but we're not adding more content, correct?
Correct. So this is our first draft, which will then create the draft, the big draft, which will then go out for public comment.
And I just want to make sure we don't miss anything. It's in so that it gets into that public period, so it can be We all know we might not get everything. I just don't want to leave something critical off the table.
Yep.
Today.
Yep. So before I turn it over to Janet, I just want to quickly take you through the slide deck and kind of frame up the way you're going to engage today around the content on the slides. So remember, we do have must, should, nice, and long shot. Those are not the buckets we're going to actually use today. Those will probably be much more of a focus for us in meeting 5 with that draft. It doesn't mean that that's out of our minds. It just means that think of it on the periphery. We will instead be using base, weights, direct funding, and outcomes, the components of the student-based funding formula pyramid, which is right here. One of the things that's important to remember, it looks like a slide you've seen before. These are the requests. We will come back to this slide. I just want to point out that at the bottom of each of these slides is a guiding question. And here's what I want you to think of. You can even write it down if you need to. There are 2 things we need to do today on each of these slides because it follows with base, weights, on and on and on. What we need to do, first thing we need to do is we need to see if there are any other things we'd like to add, any other recommendations beyond the ones that are already listed. So consider the ones that are listed or the thumbs up, right? It's happening. Heard, loud and clear. But are there others we would like to add? So that's number 1. Second thing to think about is if there are ones that are already here, would you like to include any clarification or specificity that really helps frame it up in a much more targeted way? So for example, if we get down here, I'm just going to give you an example for teacher, the teacher subcommittee. When they met, this one right here, they felt strongly about that. And so in their recommendations, they got into the nitty gritty, which, serves to kind of touch on what I said earlier about we may touch a little bit in the whole policy and specifics area if it feels really necessary and warranted today. But if we feel like there is something that needs to be added to the list that's on the slide, or do we want to provide any specificity to what is already on the list? So those are the 2 kind of big things to get done today. You'll see weights, you'll see additional dollars, and you'll see outcomes. There are a couple of things in outcomes. Yep, just in the outcomes section, we'll kind of want to hammer through just a little bit, but we'll do it when we get there, and then we're at the end. So that's pretty much the charge today is to get this list together. This is what it's going to look like. Right here is our base, weight, direct funding, and outcomes, and I'm just going to be typing. This also means that at any point in time, unmute yourself and say, hey, Jamie, hold on, add this, do that. I'm going to just be your ears and fingers today. And so as I listen, I may start to sort things in categories that you feel like aren't a true reflection of where you feel like they need to go. Do not feel like you're going to hurt my feelings at all. Stop me and tell me, and we'll rework it. This is your document.
So with that being said, Jamie, before we dig into this, we talked about at the last meeting that Sean had created a separate Google Drive for us to drop documents into, and all of us were asked to review the must-have, should-have, nice-to-have, long shot.
Right.
So I did look at that several times over the last couple of weeks, and noticed also we included an area for the base. And so what I did yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, it doesn't matter when, I went through and I thought, well, should we drill down and put all of the things that should be included in the base, very detailed, and I asked for you all to look at it, weigh in, say that's too much detail. Because my concern, thinking about it from my lens, and I don't know about you as some of you as directors, is do we make assumptions when we say something as basic as teacher salaries plus benefits? Or should we go drilling down and adding operational expenses, textbook and instructional materials and all of the kinds of things that are typically included in the funding that districts receive. So I'm concerned that we may not go deep enough and that we may be too deep on the other hand. But the other thing is that we've already put information in these categories in that other shared drive that Sean had created.
Right.
So it seems like we're starting all over to me, and that will be taking time to dig in further. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up. So a couple of different things we can do here. So let me answer the not deep enough or too deep question. I think that really depends on the conversation today. One of the subcommittees that met yesterday, they still landed primarily in a fairly broad way with their recommendations. One that I met with on Tuesday got into the weeds. So I think it is really depending on kind of where the conversation takes us. I don't think there's a reason to not get into the weeds. If there's time, energy, and effort you want to put into it, then let's do it. But, broad ones are also okay. So we just have to think about the representation in writing of this subcommittee's recommendations, knowing that we'll get time in meeting 6 to really think more about the weeds. I hope, does that answer your question for that one?
It does. And then, but by the same token, when the comment was made that Chair Ayers is going to submit and approve what is submitted to the commissioner very soon, does any of that need to be included? And so if we don't include it now and we're talking about it later, whether it's the 5th meeting or the 6th meeting, is that too late? That's the only thing that I put out to the group, because obviously it's critically important what everyone else thinks. I'm one person thinking, do we need to be a bit more specific? But I'm curious to know, is it too late if it doesn't go in something that is submitted soon by our chair?
So this is what will be submitted. The list we are making today is what I just send it to Janet via email and get a thumbs up. I'll actually get a thumbs up from all of you today that this is the list of recommendations you would like me to send on to the commissioner. Janet will have to sign off on those via email. So I think what I hear you saying is there is this this concern that maybe it won't all be represented.
And Jamie, I want to jump in there because Lillian, you fed right into some notes that I have, because I know when Jamie and I talked this morning that the sense of urgency was to make sure we captured everything. And I know we have this living, breathing document that we've been working on that I do not want to lose that content. So, and I don't want to be redundant because I want to make sure that we capture other things. Jamie, one of the notes after I had a chance to, after we had talked and I was getting ready for the meeting today, one of the questions I was going to ask, it was my understanding I needed to do an okay, and I need to get to the commissioner today at some point. I don't want to submit anything, and I won't sign off on anything until I have great comfort that everybody on my committee feels confident that we have captured everything that needs to get into it, because this feels of critical importance. If everything that goes in this, if I don't get everything contained in this draft that goes to the public draft, and I just want to keep saying that so I have it clear, what I don't want to do is to miss all of the detail work that we have in that document and then what we do today, and capture it all so that we're all confident that when it goes into the draft for the public, that we've not missed something critical because we've tried to do it hastily today. And I understand the tight timeline and we need to get it out, but I know that Jerry has to step away for a commission meeting. I don't have Sean on the call today. I don't know if inclement weather and in these school systems, these director of schools are having to deal with something. I'm wondering if the question can be is by close of business today, if I'd have had a chance to circulate between our Google Docs and what we do today to combine those and make sure that I get it submitted to my committee in writing so that I can get it to you and do a final okay, knowing that I've captured the committee. I know that adds some steps on me. Is that appropriate? Can I do it that way? because I share some of Lillian's concerns is that I don't want to do it because there's been some good work that's happened in that Google Doc, and it has been a living document. And I have not seen what you've added, Lillian. I'm not checking it every single day. So it sounds like there's even some more information in there that I should probably have looked at before this meeting. So tell me how that process would look so I can get confident that I am not missing something critical.
So I think, so let me make a proposal and see how this goes. So I propose that we pull up the Google Drive. I won't, since I can't share my screen and pull up all at the same time, too many documents going. But if folks can pull up their Google Doc, and then the goal today is to take all that information, and the word is prioritize. Out of all of that, what do we feel like we want to stand on the strongest? What are the things that we really, really want to strongly represent from a brainstorming list? So think of it as a way to kind of whittle down or cull the list for the one that we're doing today. What do you all think about that? How would that work?
Lillian, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't take it down from before.
Okay.
And I'm going to say this again because we're on the same page, Chairman Ayers. What are the directors thinking? Because again, I don't want to belabor this. If it's not included in the base from us, is it something that we're saying is not important? And so, okay, so Eddie just shared.
I think it's important that we put it in there because my fear is I don't know how familiar people that are making this list are with what's actually in what we're getting now. So I want to make sure that we put it in there. It'd be better for me to have it in there and them deciding we already got it than for us to miss out on that.
So Jamie, since we know what is already currently included,
Right.
can we make a point of saying that we spell out in our base what already exists? And that may be simple as saying whatever exists. I know that they won't say it, but I think it needs to be important. I think we need to make sure that we capture everything in translation so we don't miss what we already have. I'm hearing that loud and clear.
Sure.
On
So
the base.
a quick point of clarification is that know that whatever is currently funded in the BEP will continue to be funded in the BEP or in the new funding formula, I should say. So there isn't a real need for us to hash through those because they're there. Okay. Also know that as we go through each of these slides, the things that are bulleted will be part of the recommended list. And all it's asking today is, are there others you would add here to this list? So for example, if we're already talking about nurses, they're already here. It doesn't mean that it can't end up on your list, but it's already on the recommended list. So in the spirit of saving time and giving you an opportunity to really think about additional things outside of the list that's already here, we don't have to repeat the ones that are on the slide. Does that help at all?
And Lillian, I see your list. Jamie, would it help you that you don't see our Google Doc, correct?
Correct.
Can I copy this and scan it to you so that when you're typing up this list, that we can make sure that everything we've been putting into this Google Doc, and I've got I can capture what Lillian has already put in there, where it's called base, that we get all that put in there so that instead of trying to hash it all out and to save time, that we get comfortable that instead of being repetitive or me sitting here reading it, can I scan it to you so we know that all this gets included?
Sure.
Okay.
So let me, again, just one quick clarification. If it's on the list that you all have and it's duplicated on this slide here on these bullets, the idea is that it doesn't have to be repeated. Am I hearing you all say that you would prefer for it to be on the list regardless?
I honestly want others to weigh in. I think I've spoken too much. Freddie, Eddie, others, Norma. I'm not going to name everybody, but you know what I mean.
kind of what I said. So Jamie, I don't want to mishear what you said. So you said if we're getting paid for it right now in BEP, you're saying that it will be included automatically on the new formula?
I'm still going to send Jamie our Google Doc because she doesn't have that.
Okay,
I want to make, because it's not just what's already included in the base. There's other comments that have been ongoing, and there may be some duplication, but I think, especially since I don't have all the directors on this call, I know they've been actively participating in this Google Doc, so I can at least capture the things they felt important enough to be able to include in this must-have, should-have. And I know we're not doing that today, but must-haves really should be calculated in the base.
right. It's your
And I
base.
think there will be some redundancy, but I think we can weed out the redundancy, erring on the side of making sure we get everything in for public comment as opposed to missing something. I get concerned to cut and paste that we might miss something. And I want to be mindful of the work that this group has done.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
So
So,
Lillian and everybody on the call, as we speak, I have printed out that Google Doc with comments, and I am getting ready to scan that to Jamie right now so we can make sure that Google Doc gets included in our draft. Does that give everybody a little more comfort?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
so if someone owns that Google Doc, you can just share it with me virtually, share it with my email, and that way, Janet, you don't have to scan it in.
Well, because I am technologically backwards.
I think
And
Sean.
I'm sure there was a really quick way to do this. I've already scanned it and I'm getting ready to send it to you, Jamie.
That's okay. Listen, many,
It's kind of like when I drive, I know one way to get there. I know one way to get this to you. It's I'm sending it to you now.
So for the sake of time, because we're already 30 minutes in, how comfortable are you all going through these slides right now, the base, the weights, the direct funding, and the outcomes, and just considering if there are others that are not on the list before we, as Janet sends me that Google Doc?
Sounds good, Jamie.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
It's sent. Now I'm not distracted. No, I'm back. I just
All
wanted
right.
to make sure. So I think we've got 30 minutes and we'll jump straight to the base slide, which you've done, Jamie. Thank you all for your feedback on that. I had written that note down. I want to make sure we capture things. So looking at the list on base, the guiding questions, to go back to what Jamie said, was, is there anything else we want to add, or is there more clarity around what you're seeing on this slide?
Janet, I don't know if it would go here or not, but I would like to make sure there's clarity on where we're talking about principals and assistant principals. You know, right now they're funded at a teacher salary. So for every principal or assistant principal we get, they're funded, you know, on the base teacher salary and, you know, a 10-month, whereas many of them are 11 or 12-month employees and obviously have more responsibilities and get paid more. So I just want to make sure that that is considered when we're talking about the base amount for principal and APs.
One of the things of my notes that I wanted to make sure we included in base that I heard that I'm not real sure that I saw was funding for high quality teacher recruitment, retention, and addressing teacher shortages, especially and a need for more high competitive salaries. That'll probably show up everywhere, but I think that's especially important in these rural communities.
This is Freddie. Absolutely, particularly on the principals for those schools, below the current criteria. That's where I'm having problems with and helping with those assistant principals. So absolutely. Thank you.
This is Mike. I agree as well. And I don't know about the other superintendents, but on the school-based supports with counselors and school psychologists, I would also like to see social workers listed in that list. That's been a push in our district.
And under staffing, when you're talking about counselors and mental health professionals, and like when we had to deal with COVID, they're still here, the nurses and all that, maybe make that a category of just called wraparound services. That's a term I know that we use for our foundation, but I just think that's, and I know we can go into defining later, but I just maybe would like to get the word wraparound services in there so that it gives us a placeholder that when we get to the definition phase, we make sure if we can't remember who to list here today, that when we're defining wraparound services, that's a broad enough term. We can capture all of these things while we have time to think about it.
So Janet, do you want me to replace where it says school-based supports? You want that to instead say wraparound services?
That may be more my terminology than school terminology. I'll yield to my committee, but I just want to make sure, I think either way, as long as we have something broad enough to go back and define it, to make sure if we've missed something, we can capture it.
I think if you added a slash there and had school-based support / wraparound services, then we'll all remember what that means.
Okay. Thanks, Norma.
And Jamie, on the principal and assistant principal, you've got base salary, but I still want to be pretty clear, specific to make sure that we're talking about additional pay for those, like the base salary of what we pay principals, not, because I mean, if you say base salary, that could just be a teacher base salary. So I want to make sure we're clear on what we're talking about there.
So would it increase base salary or
just could you put like base salary reflective of what a principal makes for the extra months? I don't know how to I don't know how to wordsmith that, but
does that fit it? Base salary reflective of role requirements
and extra work duties, or maybe.
I think one committee even said got really specific, include or base salary should be no less than, and they gave a number.
Yeah, well, I'm good. I'm good with that.
You are? Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I see where it says technology sustainability. I want to elaborate on that, and just because I did try to capture our comments. Improved internet access, transportation needs, and funding to accommodate state and federal mandates were needs for rural communities. Don't remember where it came from. It's just from my notes, and it's probably in our Google Doc too, Jamie, I sent. But I feel like there's something in there that needs to be in the I don't know that it needs to be in base. It may need to be in weight. I just want to say it that those things need to be remembered. And I think maybe when we get into weighting and sparsity might cover those. But I do see technology sustainability, and it brought me to that note of improved internet access. Transportation needs aren't even addressed. I think that might get down into weighting on sparsity.
Okay, I've got a mental placeholder.
Okay. Anything else on base? And Jamie, we'll just expect that when you do see that document, that the one I sign off on will be everything we hear today. And I just want to say it again for the committee. Whatever we come up with on this call, plus everything in our Google Doc will be what I sign off on. Is everybody comfortable with that? Great. I see thumbs up. Okay.
So any additional information under teacher recruitment efforts? Or is that the brushstroke, the broad brushstroke?
I think that's a broad brushstroke that allows us to come back to it.
Okay.
No hands. Is everybody good for us to move on to weights? Okay, we'll move it on to the next slide, Jamie.
Okay. So again, here, anything else you would add, or based on what you see bulleted here, know that these are already on the list for the draft? Are there things that you need to kind of shake out some specificity?
Jamie, I've got a question on charter enrollment. So what would be a weight for a charter enrollment? Why would a student in a charter school get a weight over a regular, another public school?
Yep. So that has been the question all week. We're kind of waiting on some more formal guidance there. So of course there's already some funding portion goes to, public charters. So I'll look again to see if I have a better answer for you.
I mean, I do understand that in many charter schools, they're in, concentrations of poverty, but I would think the weights that we would have already for economic disadvantage would apply, and so it's almost like they're getting double weights, or could be, and that concerns me as a superintendent.
Absolutely.
And one point for clarification, because I believe I'm correct about this. Today, the money flows from the LEA to the charter school if the school has approved, the LEA has approved that charter. Do we know if there would be any change in regard to how that whole funding process works? So like in Nashville, Memphis, the larger metropolitan urban areas where they have a concentration of charter schools, where they've approved them, the money flows from the LEA to the charter. Do we have any indication if that process will change, where the charter public school will get their own funding, or will it still have to flow through the LEA? Does anybody know the answer to that? I'm just curious if there's any consideration that we need to take here.
I don't believe that there has been a change defined, but in lots of things that I have read just in the media on both sides of the equation, there's fear there because there's been no definition, if that makes any sense.
I think that would be more a question probably for those districts who have charters today and might have concern about what that might look like in the future if it is going to change. I know in rural we don't really have charter schools, and certainly you could in the future. So is that something we need to get clarity on?
Yes, so that is a question we have asked for some clarity around already. Yeah.
Great. I think we all could benefit from that.
Yep.
I've been kind of cross-checking my notes from our previous meetings and my notes. I think one thing we might want to put under rural, because I know in meeting 6 is when we get into definitions, but I think when you talk about rural, I think for my benefit, so I don't forget it, I don't want to forget the impacts of economies of scale for services, not just for course offerings, but for attracting teachers and hard to staff positions, especially in these rural areas. So only reason I say that is we don't have to do that today, but I think that helps me understand weights on rural, and it'll help when we get to meeting 6, when we really start to define rural and sparsity and concentrated poverty and those things. I don't want to forget that economies of scale is a real risk factor for these rural communities on attracting. It goes back to the base about retaining and recruiting teachers, about the wraparound services or what you need in the school system, about healthcare, mental health, access and economies of scales is a very real piece of weighting that needs to happen in rural, and is different than sparsity. Sparsity starts to deal with the geography and transportation and some internet and issues as well. And maybe that's just more for me for clarity, so I don't forget that in our notes.
However, I think to piggyback on what you just said, it makes me think that under the weight, perhaps there should be a weight for the attraction and retention in rural areas because that's part of the challenge. We hear it all the time, and the directors who are here today, they live and breathe that all the time, attracting them and keeping them and not losing them to another county or across the border to Kentucky or wherever, but losing them to a larger county nearby where they're paying a higher salary. So should that be a weight here to piggyback?
It would be beneficial because like Janet and Lily and what you're talking about, just the dealing with the rural and not having the tax base, to be able to incentivize those teachers recruiting and being able to offer, I know we've got AP Access for All, but it's difficult to get some of those programs in those areas because you've got low student numbers.
Right.
And I want to put a pin in that because I want to get through base and weights and all those kind of things. But I do want to circle back about local funding because I expect it to come up. So I'm just going to address it now and know that by the end of this call, I want to make sure that somehow that gets included so it doesn't get left out of the public comment period. I think we'll have time to address it further, but I don't want to get it left out.
And this is Mike, to add to the rural and sparsity. I'm not sure where it would best fit, but for example, geographically, I have a K-12 school and a K-8 school, and those schools are much more expensive to operate than your traditional K-2 or K-3 or 6-8. So somehow I'd like to figure that into the weight equation as far as the makeup of schools.
Mike Wordsmith, if you need me to.
I think that's fine. I just wanted that as a placeholder. I just know those, when you've got a K-12 school and a small number of high school students to offer programs, you're putting a lot of expense into those schools that you're not recouping back.
Sure.
This may be a place for waiting. I just made the comment about the local fiscal capacity. It's not about schools, but it's more about districts, to maybe have a conversation about district level calculations instead of county level, because within counties, there are different districts and different needs. And I think you can be in one school district and be in the same county as somebody else, and the wealth disparity, because part of it's rural and part of it's not, is a factor.
So also just quickly prompting anything that is on your Google Drive document. If it is not on these bulleted lists on the slides, feel free, just shout it out and we'll type it in here.
And I'm looking at our Google document, and it's pretty. It's pretty extensive. It's a lot to read through, Jamie, and I don't want to take the time, but in our Google Doc, for instance, there's clarity on local contribution and state approach on fiscal capacity. I think we've already put that in our Google Docs to make sure that doesn't get lost. There is something about the different school sizes. There's something about the principals in there that you only have half of a principal funded for some schools. We captured that in our Google Docs as well.
So do you think that is, so we're considering weights? Is there a line there that it's consider size? We already have consider makeup of district schools and for rural and sparsity. So is it part of the makeup is size? And do you want to add it there? Do you want something separate? Or is what said clear enough?
I think you could word it makeup and size of
Okay.
districts, and then you got it covered.
Yep. I like it.
And Jamie, I'm going to tell you, somehow I superimposed something that was my own internal document. So you'll see something that talks about Gemini at the beginning of your scan. Just disregard. I'm clearly not very good at this.
Don't worry a thing about it.
I agree with Mike. I think that would do it because of the uniqueness of every district. You know, Mike's got a K-12. I've got 6 K-8s. So those are tougher to operate than just a K-5. So I certainly agree. I think that wording would be correct.
Okay, thank you. Anything under unique learning needs? We've hit rural and sparsity. Questions are still out about charter enrollment. Remember that each of these is a layered weight. So if a student's ED and has dyslexia, then that hits 2 of the components underneath this little category. Any you would like to add underneath that? Currently not listed.
Y'all see anything else in there? Add to or more detailed? I just wanted, for me, I had listed economically disadvantaged, special education, sparsity, English learners, concentrated poverty were the ones I wanted to make sure, and that was included. And that's come up in public comments. It's also come up in all of our committee meetings.
Yep. And those are represented on the slide.
So I think we've got those covered.
Okay.
I do have a question or comment on special education. You know, there are those high cost students that are special education students, and there's a specific learning disability student who is a special education student, and those two students don't cost near the same amount of money. So how are we going to differentiate there, or is that going to come through federal from special education resources?
Okay. So do you want to consider differentiation between is the language you want to use those high cost SWD students versus
Well,
those?
Jamie, could you just put in there that the weighting for special ed, there'll be different weights for special ed students depending on the needs of those students?
Individual needs and cost of services. Is when you've got a student that must have a one-on-one assistant, they're not going to cost you the same thing as a student who needs an inclusive classroom.
Okay. How does that sentence read? Is that accurate?
Norma, does that capture what you were saying?
You're on mute, Norma.
I'm trying to get back to find Jamie's document that so that I can see it.
It's just in the screen that I'm sharing.
Right. I'm just trying to get back to that screen. I was on my Google Doc.
Oh, gotcha.
And I'm still not seeing it. So go ahead and when I find it, if there's an issue, I'll jump back in.
I'll read it to you. It says waiting for SPED reflects individual student needs and cost of services.
Yes.
Okay.
So I have one clarification, and this is predominantly toward the directors of schools. Should we have a weight for response to intervention or RTI squared? Would that be important to add here as a weight? Because
Yes.
we're talking about the general population of students who need interventions.
I think it was included in the base, wasn't it?
It is right up here. Yep.
Yes. So it's not needed here then. Okay.
Great comments. Anything else on weight?
Okay.
Okay, next slide. Additional dollars.
Anything in addition to the list you see here, or do you want to tease out any of the bullet points that are here to be more specific?
My only notes on this one was, I think it can be channeled through the weights for sparsity and economic disadvantage, but fewer educational institutions without economies of scale, more resources are needed, limited internet and broadband, less economic growth, teacher shortages, limited funding for high quality early childhood programs, and transportation. So I don't know if that's additional dollars as much as it's rolling into the weighting of sparsity or economically disadvantaged. I just wanted to say it out loud to see if there's anything that for some reason would need to be more of an additional as opposed to included to in.
So I do think there's probably a space to discuss early childhood or pre-K.
Yeah.
So we currently are, we fund VPK. However, there are some federal funds that are going to be available. It's a one-time, I think it's 5 years, national, option to apply for funds for that. However, again, when those dollars disappear, the idea is, do you feel it's necessary to have it as part of our state's funding formula?
I think the more access our kids have to preschool is important.
So maybe an add-on would be funding for high quality early childhood programs, because we really haven't addressed that anywhere else.
And that needs to take into consideration not just the personnel, but space. I mean, you're gonna, many districts do not have space for adding preschool. So you're talking about capital needs for that.
So keep going.
You're also talking about a whole different level of transportation costs if you transport those students.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions is also on the table for discussion and has come up in other subgroups or subcommittees, this week is it pre-K starting age 3 or starting age 4? I know that gets into the policy considerations, but
if we're doing placeholders, Jamie, to make sure that this all gets thrown out into the public comment phase, I think we err on throwing everything out there, pie in the sky. Is that the right approach? because we have opportunity to define but if
And-
we don't get it out there, we can't add it later, correct?
Hmm.
So maybe we need to put pre-K 3. Starting with pre-K 3. And that can get into the policy conversation, but at least it gets into the public comment period. That's just, I don't know if that's the right approach or not, but it's my understanding that this is our chance to get everything out there and then we can flesh it out. But something new we won't be able to add.
I heard
Tammy,
earlier professional development. That was kind of a mental placeholder. I know
Yes.
we have it up in base teacher recruitment efforts, but I'm wondering here if that's something, if you'd like to slide it down here instead of somewhere else.
yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, we can recruit and get our teachers, but we kind of need to improve them every year too. That's kind of important.
Okay, so we'll add professional development.
Can you make that like a separate, because that's falling under quality early childhood. I want to make sure
absolutely.
that's on its own.
Good catch.
I would like to put out on the innovative high school model. We've been doing a lot with that, and that needs to move down into the middle school. We need to, I don't know if the additional dollars, if it would go here, but making sure that we have counselors or work coaches that really talk about to our students about what high school is going to offer, what jobs are out there. We need to do a better job of workforce development, and we can't wait till high school to do that.
Agree. Jamie, a point of clarity, because I know you're typing what we're saying, but what's actually on our slide. So we're going to take what we're saying and you're typing now, our Google Doc, but also what's in our slides, correct?
So what's in the slides are already in the commissioner's hands. Those bulleted points right there are already going to be on the recommended list. The idea today is anything in addition to what we see here on the slide. So for example, we already know that middle school CTE has been pushed and has surfaced as a very strong recommendation. So it's already
But
here.
is there value of coming from our rural subcommittee that it's actually in our draft that goes in?
I don't think there would be there's not going to be anything on the tail end to differentiate between which
Okay.
subcommittee it came from.
Okay,
Because there isn't even here now. We have no idea which
committee that came from? Okay,
to the previous recommendation list.
okay. I just want to make sure that we're
No,
not
good.
assuming that what's in this slide, if we don't type it, doesn't get included. But what I'm hearing is that's automatically included. This
Yep.
is in addition to, our Google Doc is in addition to. Okay.
Yep, you got it. So Eddie, back to what you were saying, sustainability of innovative models. So some have even mentioned we're using ESSER dollars to fund X. We would like
I just saying that workforce development
okay.
in middle school. I think would work.
So we can list some as just examples if you'd like.
Well, that it's around employability skills.
Okay.
Yes, let's bullet that. Yes.
Anything else other than what you're seeing here or things you want to change with what you do see?
Is there a reason why the high dosage tutoring is listed only in 4th grade?
So that's what has surfaced. It's part of our learning loss bill, but some other subcommittees have tweaked that some. So feel free to put it on the table for discussion.
I think that needs to be expanded.
Do you want to go back up to weights and expand, or on high dosage? No, this is additional dollars. So just expand tutoring to different grades.
Right. You know, we're doing K-5 right now. If we have to narrow that back down, I don't know how productive that's going to be. Those holes are not going to get closed overnight.
Mm-hmm. So Norma, are you, would you propose that we expand to K-5, 2-5? What is there?
Is it too high in the sky to say all grades?
Absolutely. This is your all's subcommittee.
Well, I mean, how do you pick a 5th grader over a 7th grader or a 2nd grader?
Yeah.
Right.
I think this one is in direct relation to the mandate in our learning loss bill,
Right.
tied to 3rd grade retention. So,
Which we have to do because it's a mandate
right.
bill, but if we're looking at add-ons and we're trying to make sure we capture everything, then does just high dosage tutoring not need to be something we just put there for all grades?
And if we know it works, when we stop doing it, it's going to stop working.
I agree with Norma, since there was such a push with our ESSER dollars to use a large amount, then, you know, everybody or most everybody starting that up, and just to stop and go back to 1 grade it wouldn't be well received, I don't think.
I certainly agree with all of that. And one thing I was going to talk about too today is the equity regarding high school itself. The high school, our high schools have received $0 in regarding learning lost tutors, and which we found out last year with when we went virtual that was the biggest one. The biggest losses were at our high school levels and middle grades. So I certainly will agree with the all grades. Thank you, Chairman Ayers. I think that was certainly admirable.
I agree that it needs to be K-12. You know, we've got offering right now for free tutoring virtually with high school, but if that doesn't continue beyond ESSER dollars, it's still going to be needed beyond ESSER dollars. So let's make that K-12.
Okay. I see that typed in. Are there other additional dollars that you can think of for add-ons that we want to make sure it gets into this master draft for public comment?
One thing that we've not really talked about, that's kind of a special category, I know it's with technology, but it's not just having the technology itself, it's being able to afford people who are from the technology industry to be able to run that for us. A teacher can love technology, but they're not a systems analyst. So just like with principals, working 12 months and working at a higher rate, what about with our technology specialists? Because I have to pay industry standard in order to get those folks. And that's $75,000, $85,000. And that's very different from a teacher's salary.
So I've added an IT personnel / specialist. Do you feel like that covers it, or would you like to say anything else differently or add?
That covers it for me.
Okay.
Okay. Other things under additional dollars?
Jamie, could you put out beside the IT personnel, maybe parentheses, high rate of pay for those?
It'd be a high rate of pay reflective of industry.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
good.
Okay.
What else? These are great comments. Jamie, are we ready to move to outcomes?
Yep. And we are actually beyond time. So I know there are people who probably have hard stops today.
My only comment under outcomes is I think a lot of things could be the ready graduate measure might be an outcomes measure we want to incorporate into this. It's something that already exists. I think we've talked about that in previous committees. But use ready graduate as an outcome measure.
One other question I had on this, many of these outcomes are, secondary. So you're talking high school outcomes. So we have a lot of districts that are K-8. So how does that play in with them?
And as one of those districts, I feel that it's imperative that we have an early literacy outcome.
Thank you. That was on my list, Norma. So I just checked that one.
That is our responsibility, an early literacy outcome. Now, I don't know exactly where to put it, but I believe we need to be responsible for that.
Certainly not a portfolio.
And I think some kind of incentive for or reward for closing achievement gaps, wherever that fits in. It's something we remain laser focused on. And I've not seen us pass anything that doesn't talk about closing achievement gaps for historically underserved students. And rural is one of those historically underserved students. There's many categories, but rural is certainly one of those historically underserved.
On the one question where it talks about, do you include all students or just those that, are subgroups? I may be in, my other superintendents may disagree with me, but I think I almost would like to see where it's both, where you do get, it's important for your whole school, for all of your students, but then maybe there's a different weight for also addressing your subgroups.
I agree, Eddie. We can't, every child and what they bring to the table matters. And growing a child, getting them to a certain achievement level is work no matter what category that child falls into. And it seems that our General Assembly is very, very focused on this outcome piece. So I think we need to make sure that we're covering all of our bases here that we want to have in there, because this seems to be a place that they want to focus.
Agree, Norma. And I'm all about outcomes, and I'm not the educator or the director of schools. So I'm about outcomes. And I know that that's a hot button for legislators or for the kind of the private sector. That being said, I think it becomes important that you start defining what those measures are internally, or they will get defined for you. And I don't want anything to feel punitive. This should feel rewarding, not punitive. And sometimes when you let it get defined for you, it has more of a punitive flair.
So I have included outcome open to all students, but in all caps, additional for historically low performing underserved students. Tell me if you want me to wordsmith that, edit, omit.
Well, I just want to, when we start talking about outcomes, I also want to put out here for the group that, I've seen a comment or two talking about, well, there's no incentive for teachers to work hard to get, and I think that's the total wrong approach. Like Janet said, this shouldn't be a punitive thing. Our teachers are working hard. Adding a little extra money is not going to make them work any harder. We're already doing that, but I think there needs to be incentives for districts and schools that are going above and beyond and really, meeting these outcomes.
Well, it gets back to base, but I'll just agree. I don't want to take up time. I agree. If you're going to have private sector expectations, you need private sector pay. Other things under outcomes. I think y'all have said a lot and very succinctly under outcomes.
Do we need anything there around attendance? Because that has become an outcome that is very much out of our control. I don't know how other directors feel about that, but when I'm having parents put in jail consistently for truancy, and that's affecting our chronic absenteeism, which could be an outcome that causes us to lose funding if we don't fund it in the right way. Do we need to be cautious there?
I certainly think we can put that, Norma, as a placeholder under outcomes because it generates the conversation and it gets it out there. So, I mean, I would assume outcomes would be addressing absenteeism or reduction in chronic absenteeism or something, but to get a placeholder there. What other things can y'all think of under outcomes? Are we starting to feel comfortable between this and our Google Doc that'll be something that you're comfortable me signing off on as long as both are completely covered? Because I'm not going to sign anything without everybody on the committee feeling comfortable.
And no, this will be in conglomerate with all the other 17 subcommittees. So if it didn't hit yours today, it's likely that it hit one of the other 17. But I do know that there is a desire and, a real feeling of responsibility to make sure it is present on yours. But know that it's going to be a reflection of what's on the slides and the bulletin points along with the recommendations here. Know that, of course, not all of them will be present on the draft, but your voices are definitely going to be heard through this document. I would like to go ahead, if it's okay with you all, considering we are plenty over time today, and I don't think we really want to get into anybody else's afternoon any further than we have to. I'm just going to take a moment and have you start back up at the top with base. Read back through, see if there's anything else that you would like me to add, if I need to shift words, wordsmith, whatever we need to do before I'm sending it on to Janet. Tell me when you're ready to scroll.
I'm good. I yield to the group, but it looks good to me.
Looks good to me.
Everyone else, you'll just give us your yay. I can't see anybody, so you're probably gonna have to unmute.
I'm seeing thumbs ups.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Jamie, I just want to say one thing because we skimmed through the overall feedback. I want to get a comment entered in so that it gets included on all of this because I have some directors of schools that aren't represented. And I know it's been in their comments before. But under the overall feedback received, the last bullet point of local match should be reconsidered. We talked a little bit about local, the school districts versus the county, but I don't know who said it, but it stuck with me and I wrote it. Local fund, and it may have come from public comments, but sharing the wealth of a district and local tax base determines the quality of education, creating a disadvantage for rural students. And I just want to make sure that while we're considering student-based funding, we don't forget, especially in these rural areas, I'm looking at my notes, that we also need to understand there's a second component to this, and that's addressing the local capacity approach. And I just want to get it in there. I think that could be a subject all of its own, but I want to get it in there as a placeholder in our conversation so that it gets out there for that public comment and doesn't get lost. Because I'm not real sure it'll come up in another subcommittee. I know that there are a couple of director schools that we have on our committee not here, that this is a very pressing issue. It may be an issue for all districts, but I know it is especially important for these rural districts, and I don't want to disregard those notes for who may not be here.
Janet, this is Freddie. I certainly agree with that wholeheartedly. We face challenges here with local capacity since I've been director. It's been a constant battle. I've said it here and I've said it again. Their chant is bare minimum, and that's what they're going to do is the bare minimum. And that's just a battle that many, many, many directors face. So thank you for adding that. It is certainly something that's going to have to be addressed.
Absolutely. And I just don't want it to get missed. Jamie, I think we're to the last slide of when our next meeting is, and I sincerely appreciate everyone in your participation and want to make sure every voice and every comment is recognized and heard.
Yep. So January 20th, meeting number 5. Know that in between this meeting and our meeting on the 20th, public feedback will be collected on the draft. And so be looking in your inbox for that to cross your way. Any thoughts, ideas, concerns between now and then, feel free to reach out to either of us, and we're more than happy to see what we can do for you. And I appreciate your time. Please stay safe, build a snowman, eat some snow cream, do something.
Yes.
Who knows, it may be 75 degrees next week. So thank you all very much for your time. You're greatly appreciated.
Jamie, thank you for your support and help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Have a great day. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.